Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are joining us. A colleague of mine sent me a note this morning saying the last 24 hours have been a bit of a melodious turbulence. It's been a challenging time. We've gone through some change and we've gone through some uncertainty, but that uncertainty is beautiful. There was a line at yesterday's inauguration, and I read it verbatim, where it was said, "Let us not lead by the example of our power, but by the power of our example." And I could think of no better red carpet to launch today's first Power Hour of 2021 with Mike Melo and Matthew on the subject of Mike's CISO of the Year Award in 2020. Many of you would remember that at the very end of CISO Forum Canada 2020, Mike was adjudicated as the winner of that award by an esteemed set of panelists, an esteemed set of judges ranging from Farouk Nair from Orion to John Pinard from the ministry, so on and so forth. You know, they say that when you're running a show, especially a show that I run like this, the Power Hour, you often have to create your narrative. And I wondered to myself, what would be the best narrative for 2021 and how best should I spend my first live 60 minutes with you? And I thought about success and achievement. And I thought, success is not a destination, it's about the journey. And today, we're going to spend some time learning about the journey of Mike Melo, CISO at LifeLabs, how he came to this award, and more importantly, the messages that he has for you if you want to follow in his legendary footsteps. Along with Mike, we'll be joined by Matthew from SentinelOne, a company that I've followed for a very long time, a company that's been featured in the US, especially in Forbes, as one of the top 50 AI and cybersecurity companies in the world. We'll be studying Mike's journey through Matthew's perspective as well, as he looks at Mike's evolution and looks at the evolution of AI and cybersecurity technologies and how CISOs are having to keep up with the trends in technology and with that pace. So get ready, get comfortable with being a little uncomfortable because we're going to dive into some pretty interesting conversations over the next 60 minutes. My name is Ali Hirji, and all of you know me as the host of the Power Hour, full-time at Durham College, teaching in AI and in cybersecurity, and running the AI Hub, as well as the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. I'm the chair of Cyber Exchange and also the chair of various other boards, but I'm also on the board for Women in Cybersecurity, which is the next big event from CyberX. Shout out to the team at SentinelOne for making this Power Hour happen. And without any further ado, I'm going to welcome both Mike and Matthew. Welcome to the Power Hour, gentlemen.
Thanks. Hey, Ali. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic to have you. Now, Mike, I'm going to begin with you. You know, I mentioned that success is not a destination, it's a journey. And on that journey, there are no endpoints. They're just markers of our success and markers of our achievements, and you keep moving on. But Mike, your journey has been pretty interesting. You've been through various post-secondary institutions in Canada, Guelph, Sheridan, Mohawk. You studied computer science, but you've also studied biology. You studied music. Tell us a little bit about the academic journey that you've been through, Mike.
Yeah, so, you know, I started ultimately at Guelph University in microbiology. I had this fascination with viruses. So I always wanted to get into virology. I love the sciences. I love, you know, the fascination and the correlation between, you know, human evolution and life. You know, as I continued to progress through that, I always kind of continued leaning back towards my musical roots. So I was a self-taught guitarist. I love music, still do. I try to dabble in guitar when I have some free time. And so I went to Mohawk College and I did a classical guitar performance program there. I found it fascinating, the people in the music industry, just how much joy music can bring to your life. And again, I had this pivot. And the reason why I have these pivots is, you know, I'm what I like to call an explorer. I have this innate sense of wonder. I want to know what my next challenge is. I want to go experience the next challenge. This is the reason why I can't have a beach day on a resort. I can't sit on the beach for more than 5 minutes. I have to explore the world. So then that led me to security, cybersecurity. But it was interesting. I didn't actually study cybersecurity at Sheridan College. I studied software development. I studied internet communications technology. And the reason for that was actually I had a meeting with Sean Higgins, actually, from the Hirji group back when it was early in my career. He was a family friend. I reached out to him. Him and I met up. We went for a coffee and just kind of asked him a bit about cybersecurity because I had been reading into it and getting into it. And, you know, what his advice was. And one of the things that stuck with me that he said was you really need to understand all the elements in which you would need to secure, right? So how does data transit from, you know, your browser across the world, or sending an email, right? And really understanding the core concept of, you know, technology. So that's why I got into understanding how software is developed, how it operates, how networks work, and how data transits throughout the world. And that's really given me a very strong technical background to build upon and apply to my security leadership. So, you know, I went through that program. I thought it was fantastic. Going through Sheridan College. You know, I had one professor that really stuck out and really helped me expand my capabilities, and that was Bill Farkas. He was the program coordinator there, and he really taught me how to learn and how to discover and find answers that weren't readily available, right? And one of the things, actually, I have a quote on my LinkedIn. It's judge a man by his questions, not by his answers. It's from Balcer. And it's interesting. You can just learn so much by asking the right questions and listening. And that was something, you know, Bill kind of instantiated in me and helped me continue my sense of wonder. And so that's, you know, I guess from there, I just kept, I fell in love with cybersecurity. This passion for knowledge and just a lifelong learner. So I just continued growing from there.
Absolutely. And I think you've set such an important context. You know, when you talked about questions, a mentor of mine once said is that your mind, the human mind in general, is this keepsake of knowledge, and it's locked. The only way you can unlock it is through questions, and to teach us to learn. So I really like the idea of you flagging your mentors. I want to come back to this idea, which you closed with, which was this aspect of your technical acumen as well. And I'll come to that very shortly and speak a little bit about your credentials that you've gone after, especially the ones in SANS and IC squared. But I want to bring Matthew into this conversation and thank him again for his time. But Matthew, you yourself have had an arts background. You've studied in a variety of sectors in communications. You've worked in a variety of roles, but in a very interesting way, you can relate to what Mike has said, because you're someone who has also traveled the path that is typically not traveled by many. Matthew, a little bit about you and what brought you to SentinelOne.
Yeah, it's funny that Mike, mentioned that he sort of started in music and somewhere else. Well, I have a degree in English literature and arts, and so I also come from a diverse background that wasn't necessarily in cybersecurity, and I think I loved as you said, that, having an attitude of constantly questioning. And I actually teach a class on threat hunting. And one of the things I point out constantly is the best threat hunters aren't guys who have over time developed necessarily cyber hunter skills. They're guys that have built their careers on knowing environments, knowing how environments should work, so that they can identify when environments aren't doing what they're supposed to. And so I really like that point. And for the most part, I run into a lot of CISOs in what I do. And, the good news to report is, most of them have started to take that attitude. They're questioning what's going on. They're evolving. They're trying to understand, what they're up against. They know that there's an issue and they're trying to fight it. I feel like cybersecurity is this game of Survivor where we're constantly trying to outwit, outplay, and outlast. I think we've finally gotten to a point where we can, outwit and outplay the hacker adversaries. And I think the best, CISOs are trying to get to a point where they can outlast them, because I think that's where hackers have won in the past, right? They've outlasted us. They've evolved while we paused. And I think, that attitude and that type of background leads you to a place where you understand that the goal is resiliency, not necessarily protection anymore. And, good CISOs are trying to head towards that. And I loved the way Mike put it, because it sounds like you're on that path. So that's where I think we should be headed.
Absolutely. And I think you brought this aspect of, we're never averse from risk. We're always lowering that risk. And there's a difference between taking risks and being risky. And thank you for bringing that perspective to this. I want to spend a little bit of more time understanding Mike's journey, because from post-secondary experiences, you've also translated that through, and you've translated your acumen through industry credentials. I believe you've got credentials from IC Squared, you've got credentials from STANS. What led you to some of those credentials, and how important have those been in charting your journey and leadership in cybersecurity?
Yeah, there's always this common debate in the security industry. Is it how relevant are credentials, and how relevant are certifications? So there's obviously many philosophies, like learning through doing, formal education, self-study. I've personally been a big fan of self-study. And there's many credentials out there, but there's no one certification that makes or breaks a leader, right? But I think that one of the important things with certifications and studying, it really makes you learn material, even if it's theoretical. It puts your mind into this new arena and it opens you to new thoughts and ideas. And I believe, they have relevance to those who can actually understand their purpose for a specific situation. And what I mean by that is, maybe it meets a requirement of a job that you want to get, or maybe it's an interest or a gateway into a new career, right? For me, I started by learning certifications. So I went and did Cisco certifications in my CCNA and CCNP level certifications. And that's really what got me into, networking. Again, as I mentioned, I'm a lifelong learner. I've always had this sense of wanting to thirst for knowledge. And, I think professional development, not only allows me to grow, but it, have a different perspective, and it allows me to meet new people. So when we go to, training sessions or something, you get to meet new people, you get to converse, and it prepares you ultimately for the next challenge. And I say, like, with our industry, we're just in this constant state of flux, right? And we need to be agile in our strategy developments, and in our need to be aware of factors that change, whether they're, social, economic, political. And I'll kind of touch back on that, preparedness element. So, like, you've probably heard people say, luck is preparation meets opportunity. And it said that if you would have been prepared for when that opportunity comes along, you would have been lucky. So, sometimes situations present themselves that you don't cover in school or a classroom, or you don't learn in webinars and professional development. Those are kind of like defining moments in life where they challenge you to step up, and you must have confidence in yourself and in your preparedness, right, to see it through and succeed. So that's kind of like why I take professional development. I do certifications. I find it helps prepare me for my next challenge, right? And I think, to be successful as a security executive, it's even actually less about a course or a specific certification, and more about the skills you have in your toolkit and how you can leverage them, right? So one thing I've done my whole career is I always look at job postings. And it's not because I'm looking for a new job. It's because I look at job postings for my current function, and also the function or job that I may want in the future. And then that allows me to set up these benchmarks or goalposts for, like, learning objectives and outcomes and skills to help me get to the next level, right? So I know what I'm trying to achieve too. I always felt that was a great tool for me in helping me develop and continue growing in my career.
Absolutely. And I really like the way in which the two of you have married the arts into this. I often remind my students that digital design, what we do in technology, is no different from what we do in art, except that in this case, the paint doesn't dry. And I want to work with that metaphor just a little bit and start talking about how you've kept pace with the technology that's out there. I want to start off with Matthew and just get a sense of the innovations in cybersecurity that we're seeing right now. Now, I'm infamous for saying this line that, cybersecurity innovation is not about what's the next product or tool on the shelf, but it's about asking, do we need the shelf to begin with?
Right.
A little bit about how, in your experience, from the degree in arts to now, how have you seen AI, especially through the Singularity platform that you provide at SentinelOne, how have you seen AI reshape the world of cybersecurity? Matthew?
Yeah, absolutely. So, AI is this big buzzword, just like machine learning and other, acronyms that we're hearing a lot about in our industry. And just because a solution has AI or machine learning doesn't necessarily mean it's going to solve all your problems. But I think it's the way we're applying those specific things to bring things into picture like automation and workflows and improve those things so that we can get to a point. I said it earlier, we're trying to get ahead of the hackers. And I think it's those things that are starting to allow us to get to a position where we can even think about that. In the past, where we were relying on things like reputation and learning from past lessons wasn't about taking the recipe that was cooked once and applying it to something else. It was about learning how they made that recipe and knowing what will it take to make the next one? And can I be aware of that and prevent it from falling into the same trap twice? So I think the role of AI, in cybersecurity has put us in a position where we can be more dynamic and proactive instead of reactive to things happening. That intelligence and having some of that lead into automation and better workflows put us into a position with a tool like, SentinelOne, where we take some of the day-to-day tasks and add artificial intelligence there, so it's done for you. Then someone like Mike and his team can step into a situation that's been mostly handled and add that human element on top of it, which is something that AI can't provide, which is investigation and understanding and intuitiveness that is a layer that we never got to because we were too busy doing the day-to-day stuff to actually get proactive and get to a point where we're, again, not to be repetitive, but resilient and immunized against what's coming next.
Fantastic. And thank you for that. I mean, teaching in AI myself, I hear this all the time, especially when, speaking about job postings where, talking about of it being a buzzword, often you'll see, for example, people talking about, we want to hire somebody with 10 years of experience with TensorFlow. But it's only been around for 6 years, buddy. As an example, how exactly does that work? So speaking about buzzwords, I think you've hit it right on the head. And I think you've also made a very important point, which is this aspect of know the builder, then get to know the build, and knowing how products are put together. And Mike, from everybody that I spoke to, and as you know, I was part of that panel that had the honor of adjudicating you as the CISO of the year. And one of the things that we had recognized about you was your ability to use communications and consultation. A question's come in, which I'm going to weave into this, which is when you think about AI and you think about the advancements in the tools that you use to keep your organizations fortified proactively, do you get the sense that while you are maintaining smooth relations with your teams, with your partners and vendors like SentinelOne, do you feel like automation is now rendering you to have less control over your security environment? Or conversely, how are you ensuring that you have control amidst all of this automation? Mike?
Right. Yeah, it's a great topic. Automation is, and AI, and as Matt said, it's this buzzword. It's the new hotness in the industry, right? It's been around for a while, right? Obviously through SOAR, but I do want to say one thing about automation, and it's to be mindful because it requires proper design, planning, and governance, right? It's not something you can just pull out of a box and off to the races you go. There's been a lot of time and investment, especially in companies, that they've been able to do back-end orchestration and automation in their technology. So, leveraging those tools obviously allow us as security professionals and teams to be a little bit more hands-off in some of the functions of the day-to-day, right? And I think, one of the most important things before jumping into developing more automation in your program is really understanding what's the intention of automation, right? You have to really strike this balance of what can be automated and why. And is automation there to prevent human error? Is it to aggregate and provide insight into data? And ultimately, can it prevent an attack or identify attacks faster and allow us to be able to remediate? And again, going back to that cyber resiliency model of, moving away from this protection, but identification and going through the cyber chain and ultimately addressing your issue. But, automation is still a pretty mature practice for what an organization needs to do, right? It's not something you can really just start with. But we've seen it tremendously in SecOps, right? SOAR, running playbooks, orchestrating everything in through API. Fantastic companies in the space doing a lot of innovative stuff there, right? And I'd say one of the biggest pitfalls to avoid with automation, and you've kind of referenced it here, Ali, is automation isn't used to replace humans, right? But I'd say it's rather to elevate the human experience. Automation cannot replace a team, right? It doesn't do certain elements. And, I see this in the trading industry. So I worked in finance, and you saw this in the trading industry. Day traders, there's stock floors, they're buzzing. And now it's all algorithm traders, right? So it's all algorithms that are automating the way in which trades are executed. But there's, gates in there to prevent, blowouts and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's the people behind the algorithm who are driving the strategy, driving the statistics, the probabilities of, making trades at certain times. And I'd say similarly in security, right? It's really there to allow us to leverage creative and critical thinking, right? And to deliver an agile security protection program, resilient program. There is no set it and forget it, right? Like that doesn't exist. That's not how security works. So, I think automation has a lot to offer to security, as long as you understand how it can benefit your company, right? And we've seen things like RPA in robotics are really allowing organizations to really deliver on these new and exciting opportunities, especially in COVID, right? You could have remote operators doing automation function in factories, manufacturing. So it's exciting. It's a quickly growing vertical, and definitely something to watch, right? And it has AI develops to grow. I'd say, you have to be mindful again of how it integrates into your team. But at the end of the day, it is a technology. It's a function of your team, but you are still the operator. You're still the logic board behind the design of the automation, right? So I would say, that's kind of my piece on automation. I find it fascinating. And we try to find, areas of automation at LifeLabs where we can.
I've often said this in my classroom, disruption is not a bad word. And at the end of the day, I think you've raised two very important points, which also came up at CISO Forum Canada about a month and a half ago, which is, with automation, there is an impressive notion of validation. And I'm going to come to how, when Mike spoke about this idea about there's no set it and forget it, but there definitely is set it and monitor it. And I want to get into how SentinelOne kind of helps you with that monitoring piece, but also re-emphasizing something that was brought up during CISO Forum Canada. And I believe my audience can correct me if I'm wrong. This was at the day one keynote by IBM, where they mentioned, there's no AI without IA. There's no artificial intelligence without information architecture. And I want to dive a little bit into that information architecture within SentinelOne, and then we'll go into some use case examples with both Mike and Matthew. Matthew, let's come back to you. From a SentinelOne perspective, you've got some high-profile clients, you work with smart individuals and enterprising individuals like Mike and his teams. How do you ensure that they're able to set a particular control, but also monitor it? What are some of the dashboards? What are some of the toolkits that you provide so that somebody in the SOC can actually see how an AI is responding to a threat? How do you achieve XAI, explainable AI?
Yeah, so I think it's the balance, and I'm starting to understand why Mike won CISO of the year, because he's sort of led us right into a place where we think it's really important. When I think of SentinelOne, one of the things we've tried to do is put organizations in a place where they can balance the skills and tools. Yeah. So give you a tool that will allow the skills of your team to flourish. And that is, you said, through information, the way we present it. I'll give one example, which is our storylining technology. We take all the events and everything that's going on at an endpoint, we feed it and pre-correlate it for you so that by the time you're looking at an event, most of the hard work has been done for you, and puts you in a place where that human element that Mike was referring to, that we're never going to get away from, is I'm now in a state where I'm investigating information that's already been put together for me. I'm monitoring events instead of firefighting. And that is the goal. I don't want to be in a constant state of firefighting, because that's where, again, the hackers will win. I want to be in a place where I can investigate and prevent. So I want the information brought to me in a correlated, conducive fashion where I can understand it. I don't have to be a genius in putting process trees together and understanding what links together. That part is done for me. And then I use the skill set I have, which is being able to look at that and understanding what the impact might be on my environment, and therefore responding to that instead of the event itself, putting my place in where I can change environmental elements to prevent anything from happening like that again. And I think that's where that tool set and that conversation of facilitating the skills within people's security teams really comes into play with us. Is we've built a tool that doesn't replace humans, that gives humans a running head start.
Absolutely. And I think I concur with you again, is that, this session so far, the first 25 minutes, has reminded me again of the closed door discussions we had when we were adjudicating the CISO of the Year award. And more importantly than that, I think you've underscored a fundamental tenet within the SentinelOne team, which is you allow the end user, in this case, someone like Mike, to test your particular technology against certain instances which you've created. One of the things that I hate is typically when you go into a session where a partner wants to show you technology, and then they introduce their own malware, they introduce their own threat, and then suddenly, you wonder, well, what if I bring one of my own? How would you react to that, and how would the tool perform? I think that open door policy really spells the ethos of SentinelOne, which is, you work with an open door. And I think that's why you're jiving so well with Mike, and more importantly, you're resonating a lot with practitioners in the space. We've got another 30 minutes or so to work with. And I want to take this aspect of understanding technology and new tools and peek into Mike's approach to it. Now, Mike, as a leader in this space of cybersecurity, your teams obviously look to you for guidance, and you look at and you study the design of different tools before you make a purchase. I think people often forget that while budget is extremely important, also knowing that tools are not a one size fits all. You've got to study the design of tools. There's no design. There's either good design or bad design. How have you led your teams with understanding their tool stack and the tech stack that's ideal for their day-to-day jobs? Mike, your perspective.
Yeah, I'd say that, I think the industry generally jumps to technology as usually the first thing to look at when it comes to security. I think there needs to be a balance stricken between, process, the holistics of a security program, your governance, your technology. But as we look in technology, how do we avoid buying all of the Lamborghini type tools in security, right? It's the tools are hot. I love the tools. I love the technology. It's fascinating. It's fun. But there's so many tools out there. So how do you really know and understand what's right for your use cases? So, I'll take an example of what we did actually last year with COVID, right? COVID kind of changed everything. And it forced organizations to move to remote operations. So what we did was we obviously have a technology stack already. We had a technology stack strategy. And before just going out to market and buying a bunch of, cloud-centric tools and all of this, what we did was we actually performed SWOT analysis on our tool technology stack. And we really needed to understand what revisit all of our use cases, understand the new use cases that we have given COVID transformation, and then apply a roadmap into, okay, this is where we can either pivot or leverage previous technology, or maybe we actually do need net new technology. So it's a very strategic approach when you're trying to evaluate and understand what technologies are going to help you and the organization succeed with the new threats that are coming out, right? So one of the big ones that we saw trending was the shift to remote work, the cloud transformation. So we actually got into a SASE product with Netscope back in, I don't know, before COVID actually hit. So luckily, we saw trends, and what we also do is we study trends, right, in the industry. So where are things going? This is why it's so important to talk in the community, to be engaged, have these types of sessions, understand what people are seeing in the public space, right? Because at the end of the day, we can build technology for one fit purpose now, but how do we ensure that we are building scalability and extensibility into our product technology for the organization to flourish in the future without having to do reinvestment, rip out and replace and swap things out in and out. It's a very fine balance, and there is no one architecture fits all. There's no two alike security programs, right? Security programs are different. And one of the things I find in the industry is people are too hung up on perfection. Security professionals seem to like to strive for perfection and this theoretical concept of what is best security, right? And, I think that security needs to be purpose-built for the organization. Each organization is going to have unique needs, and you leverage the technology that will allow you to get there. But it's not a technology first discussion, right? So it's definitely always an interesting conversation. I love talking to people about technology. It's fascinating and, discovering new technologies as well, but it has to be purpose fit for your company. And so we did the SWOT analysis. We found that was extremely helpful. We built this kind of methodology out, and we have a tech stack roadmap for the next 3 years. So yeah, that's kind of what we did.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think the best way I can canvas that very eloquent description that you gave on evaluating technologies in the SWOT is by quoting my friend at Waterloo Hydro, Mark Dillon, where he always reminds me it's all about PPT: people, process, technology, and in that order, because of the training that goes with new technologies and the understanding of process, so on and so forth. And I think it's so important that I always tell this, that, you should be able to take risks by not being risky. And you've shown a very interesting framework by which we can risk the usual in order to see what's possible. Again, Mike, another testament to why you were awarded CISO of the Year. And thank you for that description. We've got another 20 minutes or so. And Matthew, some questions have come in specifically in the healthcare space. And I'm going to start weaving that into the conversation. And as I said earlier on, we're going to get a little comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now, Matthew, in organizations where, for example, like LifeLabs or similar size organizations where you've got not just multiple people working within the enterprise, but you've got end users in the thousands and millions, but more than that, you've also got multiple devices, aka IoT, the Internet of Things, or also known as the Internet of Threats. How have you at SentinelOne been able to keep up with the different technologies that are out there, the different specifications that are out there, the different hardware types that are there? How are you ensuring that your models for AI are staying up to date and current with the ever-changing landscape and technology? Matthew?
Yeah, so there's no exact science. I think, you're constantly playing a battle. It's like when you're playing defense in a sport, right? You're trying to predict what the offense might do. And in the cybersecurity world, we have constantly been on the defensive side, constantly trying to predict what they might do. And then there's this massive evolution in technology. Mike pointed to the fact that I don't think anybody last March was ready for their entire workforce to go from working inside of 4 walls in their building and immediately be forced to go home and work from more dynamic environments. So we were already seeing user sprawl, device sprawl, data sprawl, and then it went exponentially. So I think what SentinelOne is, what's kept us ahead of that curve is, the 2 aspects. We have people who are constantly working with the vendors and the manufacturers on the technology side, on the endpoint side, to understand what they're going to come out with next, how they're responding to trends, how they're responding to digital evolution. And then we have another team that probably doesn't talk to the product dev team. That is our threat team. They are the guys that are digging deep in the dark web and in the criminal world. They have personas there that they use to sort of be aware, because you're only going to be aware of what's coming on that side of it if you're living that life. And so we have our watchtower team that's constantly paying attention to what's going on there, as well as our dev team that's working in the more standard ways with manufacturers to understand their evolution. You combine those 2 evolutions and you get to a place where we're building products that are not making us play defense anymore. We're playing offense, and we're putting the offenders in a defensive position where they have to figure out a way to get around us, because we're prepared for the new technology that's coming, and we're prepared for the new threats that's coming. But it puts you in a place where you have to, have a partnership with other technology vendors. I think that's been an issue in our industry, is we always think of everybody as competitors, right? And there's been so many crossed lines now with, infrastructure organizations acquiring security companies, and vice versa. So, we have to play there's only one competitor, and that's the bad guys. And so we have to play together. And that's where we've seen success, is, playing well with our friends in the technology world. Because, you're not going to predict the way the world evolves. You can only understand what technology is coming.
Fantastic. And I think, that last statement that you made about, there's the bad guys, the bad girls, and everything in between. And this is such an important way for me just to throw in a little bit of a quick advertisement, is that I think you've touched on the diversity of this space. You've done two very important things. SentinelOne's approach to research and development, which, as you were both demonstrated very well, is driven not by necessarily what you know technically, but how contextually aware you are. And it's all about critical thinking. I say this in my class all the time. Critical thinking is not what's in the books. Critical thinking is not what got you to that book to begin with. And I think you've explained that diversity and interdisciplinarity is so importantly and so well, that it shows that it's the most effective piece within SentinelOne's arsenal. But I also think you've also raised a very important thing about the Canadian Women in Cybersecurity event that's coming up. One of the topics that as a board that we've come up with is around understanding the diversity and decoding the dark web, understanding who the bad guys are, the bad girls are, the types of languages, the types of motivation, being socially, philosophically, and psychologically aware. And those are traits that you find in Mike, which has attributed a great deal to his success. So Matthew, thank you for that very eloquent description. Mike, we're going to come back to you and deal a little bit with how Matthew spoke about the shifting landscapes and the ever increasing number of users and the technology stacks that are out there. Now, a question has come in, which I knew would ultimately happen, but I'm going to stitch it in a way that makes it a little more palatable. And this is the question, obviously, on the realities of when you joined LifeLabs, which, if I'm not mistaken, was in late December of 2019, on the heels of a difficult breach, and you had to restore trust in the community. You had to restore not just trust with your stakeholders, but also internally, you had to restore confidence. What were some of the steps that you took almost right away to ensure that the ship was finding some form of stability, right?
Yeah. So actually, back to my history at LifeLabs, I actually started in 2018 at LifeLabs as a senior manager of cybersecurity under the previous CISO, and then ultimately the breach happened, and I led the organization through that breach itself, and was ultimately promoted to CISO during the breach. So, breaches are interesting. And one thing about them is that they're unique, right? And I don't know if there's any, best practices or formal best practices when it comes to, how to handle a breach, because they're all different. But, I definitely think you referenced one critical component to it is trust, right? Internal trust, external trust. And, I'd say one of the key things is people matter, right? And by that, I mean, you have a very high tension, high stake moment, and you need to be surrounded by, those that not only can trust you and rely on you, but those that you can trust, right? And as a breach evolves over time, you sometimes can't predict the fallout or, preparation for a breach, right? So who you work with really matters. And then I'd say perspective, right, is everything in these situations, right? If I asked, I don't know, 10 security professionals, what is the fit of your organization for your security team? Probably 9 out of 10 of them would say we protect the business, right? And the truth is, you enable the business. There needs to be this shift in thinking of perspective on cybersecurity is not just this expense. It's not a sunk cost. It's an investment, right? It's an investment, and part of making that investment is about education, right? So it's to all levels of the organization. And the current thinking may be that security doesn't generate dollars, it absorbs it, but in reality, the thinking needs to be security does protect you and your investment and helps you grow, right? Without your customers, there is no business. Without the business, you can't generate money. And so, part of that trust also comes to the consumer, right? So rebuilding trust in a post-breach landscape, definitely a challenging feat by no means. But I think that with the organization being so supportive of the event and the remediation, I've also ensured that I've developed tremendous stakeholder relationships, right, with our CEO, and also the public, right. So getting out and speaking to the public, speaking in these types of engagements, kind of being transparent with what we're doing, right. We're trying to achieve an ISO certification in cybersecurity. Not many healthcare companies do that. But really, it's our foot forward to show that we are here making Canadian healthcare secure, right? It's interesting. It's one of the reasons why I came to healthcare was I wanted to make cybersecurity a priority for the healthcare industry. I wanted to make accessing digital healthcare records secure for all Canadians, right? I'm a customer. Almost everyone's a customer. And it was funny, the opportunity at LifeLabs presented itself in 2018. My sister-in-law actually found out that she was pregnant through a blood test, and she accessed the results through LifeLabs online portal. And that's actually what kind of brought me to healthcare and moved me away from finance. I thought, there's something really interesting about this. And, ultimately that comes down to, we want a platform in which we can trust. All customers do, and security is becoming more mainstream every day. So it's very interesting, always ensuring that you are building your customers' trust. We're doing a lot of great things at LifeLabs around that. Again, achieving the ISO certification. We got a lot of great things coming out this year as well. One of those things is actually we're going to be releasing next month a responsible vulnerability disclosure program. To allow security researchers to ultimately test against our systems and have a more public-facing perspective on our cybersecurity footprint, and ensuring that it's not only us looking at our stuff, because bad guys are always looking at our stuff. So how can we ultimately ensure that we can leverage other people, other specialists, and help us make the most secure platform for our customers so that they can access their medical records securely?
There's so much that I can unpack from that, but one of the things, and I'm going back to CISO Forum Canada, as you know, it was run by CyberX and Cyber Exchange, but also supported by EC Council. They have the flagship certification, Certified Ethical Hacker. And I think you've emphasized the importance of, to a degree, celebrating and accepting this culture of hacking to some degree, because they help us build the immune systems of our organizations. And by creating environments where you can test your environments, where you can test your cybersecurity posture, I think that creates not just transparency, but also creates for a culture of sharing so that we're all secure as Canadians. And I thank you for doing this. I'm pretty sure that, there were a lot of challenges with getting it done, but it seems like, you've underscored the point that, forgiveness is easier than seeking permission, and you just got it done. So good on you. We've got another 15 minutes, and I'm going to go to Matthew because the questions again come in, and this has to do with something that Mike brought up around relationships with the CEO and with the board, so on and so forth. And Matthew, I'm sure you get this quite a bit when I teach in AI as well. I often find, some of our clients, when we do projects for them at the college, they'll say, well, you know what, you build this tool, let it do its voodoo and give us the result. And sometimes that voodoo needs to be unpacked a little bit. How does SentinelOne ensure that someone like a Mike is empowered with the tools that he needs, with the data that he needs to explain to the CEO why we're deploying an automated solution, to explain to the board why this AI-driven solution should evoke our trust? Can you give us a little bit of a perspective into that?
Yeah, I'll actually give you the perspective of two different experiences, right? And I think it rolls back to a little bit of what Mike said around being an enabler. The best CEOs in the world understand that security is an enabler. And the tools you're going to purchase as security solutions are part of that mix, and your security team is an equal part to that mix. So I'll tell you two different experiences that the SentinelOne team here in Canada experienced in the April timeframe. I had one customer call me, and it was too little too late. They said, you know what, we just sent everyone home, and now the CEO and our sales leaders and people are coming to me and say, this isn't working. I've got guys that are getting shut down all the time. And, you know, like productivity is taking a hit due to security issues, because they went and said, hey, we're just going to send everybody home and worry about it later. The other coin to that was another organization that came to me and said, Matt, can we do this? Can we do this successfully? Not from a, will, my salesperson have the right tools they need while working from home? They said, can we be successful in the same security posture we have now if we migrate all our users home? And that's what it comes down to. It's not just about stacking tools and spending as much money. Some of the companies that have spent the most money on security tools have been breached, and breached often. Other organizations that have strategically purchased tools, evaluated tools properly based on how they could be implemented with their specific use cases, with their specific environment, they've been the most successful. So I think that's sort of the secret sauce, is there's no one perfect example. I think it already came up. There's no perfection in cybersecurity. There's what's good for you, what's good for your organization, and what will help you accomplish your goals. So when we have people evaluate our tool, I had a conversation with an analyst from Gartner and someone in our marketing department, and I pointed out, and neither one of them liked it. I said, EDR, which is the industry we're in, created more problems than it solved. And they didn't like that, but it was the truth. Because if organizations are not prepared to use a tool that you put in place, then it's going to cause a problem that wasn't there before, instead of solving the one you initially acquired it for. So proper evaluation and understanding how your team can use a tool. And that again rolls back to why SentinelOne has not tried to make an EDR tool that checks all the boxes. And maybe we focus, some would say, too much on the user experience and application in the user environment. But I don't think that's a problem. I think that's how we've actually solved, some of the issues that organizations face, is by thinking about how quickly can someone implement a tool and get it working to their advantage without it creating new problems that they never experienced before.
Absolutely. I think you've emphasized user-centric design really, really well. And again, Matthew, very, very eloquent. Your arts degree bleeding through almost everything that you said. And I agree with you. There's no perfection in this. There's only progress. But along with progress, I think Mike's going to have to add another P to that, which is priorities. And while you've got all these products that are out there, another P, as a CISO, you need to establish priorities for your team. How has that shifted in the current landscape? And what's your approach towards prioritization, right?
Yeah. Well, what can I say? Cybersecurity is busy, right? Everything's a priority. And so how do you get through the priority of priorities? I'd say, like, when it comes to being an effective leader, I think it comes down to recognizing that, our people are the key to our success, right? I would not be as successful as I am without my amazing team, my executive team, and also the organization. We have a one-team methodology, a one-team culture at LifeLabs, and it's awesome, right? But when you're dealing with people working from all different locations and everyone has unique personalities and perspectives, it begs the question, how can we create alignment so that the teams can work and collaborate well together, and ultimately, how can we communicate effectively, right? And COVID has really challenged the way in which we did things traditionally. So what I've learned is that, many leaders find this the hard way, and it's a famous saying, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can have, the best objectives, and you can have the best goals, a bold vision. But if you don't address culture, change, behavior, you're just limiting yourself. because it's really those elements which ultimately can help you or hinder your team. So if you want your team to be risk takers and entrepreneurial, but your culture is bureaucratic or approval based, your objectives are not going to materialize. So, this is something that I really strived for and brought into the team here. And there's 3 things that I did and that we're currently doing. So one is I created values for which our team can look into it as terms of, how we operate, how do we make decisions. Our values are, we're proactive, we're enabling, we're approachable, we're results driven, we're simple. And so I created the acronym PAIRS. And I won't go into detail, but my team knows what they mean. And I think, they're somewhat self-explanatory, but I think it's important to have, mission, vision statements for your teams, and then also values in which your teams prides themselves on day-to-day and decision-making. I'd say secondly, we've operationalized those values. Values are useless if they're just posted on a wall and are a 50,000 foot conceptual level, right? So I had to take these values and really allow them to serve as guiding principles, right, for decision making for our team. So we operationalize them, and how it relates to decision making, strategy, meeting hygiene is important, right? So when we get into priorities and discussing priorities, is also time management, right? So we implored a meeting hygiene program. So how to have effective meetings, how to conduct effective meetings, and the sort of those types of things. And then finally, I'd say we established these quick wins. We're actively working to create a culture by examining what enables, what our enablers are, our blockers, and really understanding, how culture will assist us in our performance priorities, right? So it's not a top-down approach. It's a collaborative, co-authored approach. My team knows I have an open door policy, and I ensure that we have multiple mechanisms for open feedback. I want to hear from my team. I think my team is built of very smart people, and I am not going to be the smartest person in the room all the time. And, 2 heads are better than 1, 4 heads are better. You know how the saying goes, right? It ultimately, we're a team for a reason, and we have to collaborate and work together the same way the threat actors are working together. And that also gets into the community too, right? It's just, we need to be better as defenders for organizations in communicating effectively and prioritizing, ultimately how we work through our day-to-day. So those are some of the things that I've implemented at LifeLabs with the security team. It's been going tremendously well. We have a great culture, a great program, a great team. And ultimately, we manage priorities through all of these different elements. And so it doesn't matter what really comes up. We have an ability to address it regardless. So we're agile in that fashion.
Fantastic. And again, goes back to what I said earlier on. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but forewarned is forearmed. And I think that ability to have those conversations with your team, to present what you're seeing from a leadership perspective and bring other perspectives to the table, absolutely fundamental to cybersecurity leadership, diversity at its very core. And I cannot wait. I believe, Mike, you're going to be on 1 or 2 sessions at Canadian Women in Cybersecurity. And I cannot wait to start unpacking a little bit of the diversity even further from a social lens, but also from a academic lens, from a technical lens as well. Diversity takes many shapes and fashions. Now we have about 4.5 minutes left, and I know my guests have other places to be. There are questions that have come in around insider threats. There are questions that have come in on priorities, but also on response time, so on and so forth. Matthew, I'll pick one question and ask you to give a very quick response to it before we come to a little bit of a soft landing and bid each other adieu. Matthew, this is the question on SentinelOne approach to sharing. And this has to do with, do you only share your intelligence with those who are subscribed to your service, or do you also have a practice of sharing with not just other potential clients, but maybe even other potential partners and vendors? How do you position, how does SentinelOne position itself in the sea of cybersecurity service providers?
Yeah, so our corporate strategy is share as much as possible. I mean, obviously, you'll always have some maybe, things that cannot be shared just from, we might not share our master code. But when it comes to incidents, breaches, lessons learned, campaign things, research we've done on cybersecurity events, we firmly believe that we will only advance if we share. One of the things, and I'll use something outside of SentinelOne that we were really impressed with one of our competitors. When Sunburst hit FireEye, the first thing they did is go out and share all of the IOCs that they discovered. We loved that. We took that and reshared it to all of our customers, as well as anybody who wants to come and visit what we call our threat feed or our blogs or whatever. We publish this very publicly, and we will continue to do so with any information. Obviously, we would never disrespect a customer by sharing something they would not allow us to. But outside of that, we truly believe the best advantage we can give any customer or any organization out there from a cybersecurity perspective is sharing those lessons learned. So yes, as our corporate policy is to share as much as we can.
Fantastic. And I think that's evident in the way in which you shared your experiences and shared in the limelight with Mike and really stitched your responses in line with how we've been celebrating his achievements. So Matthew, you've really been a really solid ambassador of that statement of sharing. Now we have about 3 minutes left, and I'll take one question. And Mike, this is going to be all about you, and this is on the aspect of your thoughts on mentorship. I know we have a few graduate students who have tuned in as well, and they're asking the question around what are you doing to ensure that you're creating more opportunities and safer spaces for younger graduates and lesser experienced folks to come in and experience healthcare and cybersecurity environments. Are there any programs that you're running?
Yeah, great question. So we actually have a big co-op program in our cybersecurity team. I came through a co-op program myself. I think it's fantastic, right? And even if at the end of the day, if we can bring on all the new talent, that's even better. But if not, at least we're doing our part in introducing people to the industry and getting an experience and opportunity to get a chance, right? And get some experience through people who have lived different stories, different experiences. So that's one of the ways in which we actually promote the younger group coming into the industry. I also am heavily engaged with the Sheridan College alum, C3X, also, where we do a cyber challenge, generally for colleges. So I participate in that. I volunteer there to help either, whether it's speaking, whether it's setting up some of the environments, whether it's participating in some of the activities. I feel I've always had a mentor in my life, and I've always had multiple. And I've also had mentors who aren't even in cybersecurity, because it was always my view on it is to be versatile, right? So I've had executive type leaders who were my mentors. I've had CIOs, I've had CISOs, I've had technical people who were mentors as well. And then people from the arts, people who it wasn't even a formal mentorship relationship. But, I think it is always a great way to learn from others, right? It's, again, that perspective, having different perspectives, learning through different experiences. I myself am also a mentor for some of the younger generation as well. I mentor a couple students, not even in cybersecurity, they're in computer science, some are in math. So it's a way to give back. It's kind of this cycle, right? Learning, giving back, sharing my experiences, my knowledge. I love talking to people about my experiences. I love being able to help other people learn and teach people. I was a guitar teacher for a while. I was a tutor throughout school. I always like engaging with new people, and I like, sharing my experiences to hopefully help them understand, a different perspective or help build them in their career.
Mentors need mentors, and those mentors need mentors as well. But know your blind spots, and I think co-op programs really help you with knowing that as well. And for those of you who are listening in, SentinelOne also has a whole bunch of programs around the world that you can subscribe to. If you're on Cyber Exchange and you're watching the live stream, you'll see links that are popping up below in the live stream, and you can go to one of those, and you can reach out to the folks at SentinelOne on cyberexchange.ca. We have 2 more minutes, and I'm going to ask another question to Mike and then Matthew, and then we'll come to a soft landing. Mike, books don't need batteries. I've said this a whole bunch of times. I love books. Can you tell us about one book that really resonates with you, Mike?
Oh boy, put me on the spot there. I'd say one of my favorite books was The Unicorn Project. And it's a novel about developers. It has nothing to do with necessarily cybersecurity, but I just think it really gave you this good insight into managing organizational change, right? Especially from the crux of the Phoenix Project, and just how to solve problems, right? We're faced with problems every day, and we don't know the answers, right? We have to find answers. We have to be creative. We have to think about, how can we leverage our preparation, our experience, and how can we leverage our assets? How can we leverage our networks, right? And the one thing I've always found amazing about the cybersecurity industry is that everyone is willing to help each other generally. It's a very fun culture to be around. A lot of people have experience and knowledge to share. So I always found that was a really cool book because it really dives into problem solving, but it also gives you perspective from an organizational element as well. So, there's some good application to it. So I've always enjoyed that book. There's probably a bunch of other ones I just am not thinking of right now, but that's always a good go-to book for me.
Fantastic. And very, very wondered how much Mike reads. Well, the essay that he just orated for you on that book, The Unicorn Project, tells you about the ferocious level of reading he engages in. And to our listeners, I cannot underestimate or overemphasize how important reading and absorbing the right books are. And always questioning, how did I get to that book? Matthew, with your arts degree, I'm pretty sure it's not a Jane Austen book that has stuck out with you, but I don't know. Which novel or which book or which text has really resonated with your work at SentinelOne?
Yeah, so it's funny, and beyond technology, my other passion is sports. I love all kinds of sports, and one of the books that has forever stood out to me was Last Shot. That one of it's similar to the documentary that ended up coming out about Jordan and the Bulls, and just their his leadership within that team, and it's some of the things that I've heard Mike go over today. And one of the things that Jordan sort of set out for that Bulls team that was so successful was a strategy that I heard from another leader, one of the best leaders I've ever worked for. And the day he hired me, he told me, he said, Matt, I'm going to explain the type of leader I am. I'm the type of leader that when we get to the bridge, I'm going to run with you, not behind you or ahead of you. We're going to discover the bridge together. And I think, when I think of my day job and the things that I try and accomplish, and I help other, cybersecurity leaders understand, is that's the type of mentality. And it's those types of things that I, in that book specifically that stood out to me was, the right leader is working with his teammates and doesn't see them, necessarily as above them, but with them and facilitating them and making them better. And, just a common sports book. Yeah, I could quote Shakespeare and Austen and a bunch of other folks, but I'll save that for when I have to teach remedial English again. But it's certainly that competitive mentality. You can see behind me, I've got a note that reminds me every day to go hunting, and so that's part of that nature.
I love the reference to sports. I enjoy sports too, and hey, being the substitute water boy is still being part of the sport. So I certainly resonate with that. Gentlemen, if nothing at all, we've certainly given our audience a whole bunch of new quotes for their wall of quotes, or to put onto some t-shirts. So before I thank you, I do want to again throw a shout out to SentinelOne for making today's session happen, and a shout out to Maddie and the folks at Cyber Exchange for putting together this phenomenal platform, which, by the way, it's a team driven by students, many of whom have graduated from Durham College as well. So big ups to all of you. Gentlemen, first I'm going to thank you and ask you, as well as the other members from SentinelOne, to stay on in our session so that while I close, we can just have a 1-minute debrief. And I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to turn to our audience by saying once again, thank you, Matt and Mike. But to our audience, I really hope that in celebrating Mike Melo, you've come to a realization that, as I've said before, the secret to success is that there are no secrets. And everything was laid out for you here today. You can connect with Matthew, you can connect with Mike on cyberexchange.ca. And really a shout out to the Cyber Exchange team for making sure that these awards are available, that we can be part of committees that adjudicate these awards. You might be wondering, why are these awards important? Well, in order to celebrate success, you need to celebrate the success of others. And I think building community has been at the very heart of what Cyber Exchange does. And as board members, it keeps us wanting to continue and contribute as much as we can. With that said, some exciting events are coming up. Firstly, talking about contextually aware cybersecurity, SentinelOne is always right in there. They have an event coming up with one of their partners, which is Netscope, I believe, and that is about love is in the air and cybersecurity. I don't think anybody needs any more details besides knowing February is a particular month where you need to be investing in your partner or your better half. We're going to learn a little bit about, before you do those online purchases, how do you need to stay safe and secure online, specifically around cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, love, and COVID will be an interesting mix. The link to that event will be shared on cyberexchange.ca. Thank you, SentinelOne, for making that happen. In terms of the Power Hour, we have some exciting Power Hours coming up. Next week, I'm speaking to the son of Olivera Zatizalo, who is the CSO for Huawei. Alexa has just completed his CEH, and he is perhaps one of the youngest CEH participants and successful candidates that I know of. You can join me for that next week. Next month, the author of Grey Day, Eric O'Neill, will be joining me and talking to me about stories from America's first cyber spy. Many of you may have read the book or watched the movie, and that session will be brought to you by VMware Carbon Black, and you're probably already seeing the ads rolling to your screen. We have sessions coming up with Kaspersky, session coming up with IBM, sessions coming up with other members of the Cyber Exchange Advisory, including the Phelps Group. And I look forward to seeing all of you at that session. To my panelists, thank you. Stay on. To our guests and to our audience, there were 100+ viewers today. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy. And remember, don't just lead by examples of your power, lead by the power of your examples. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.